Have you ever had that one person in your life who was supposed to be in your corner, but they ended up being the one who threw the first punch? We're talking about betrayal. Not the kind you see on a TV show, but the kind that keeps you awake at 3 a.m., wondering what you did wrong. If you've ever felt like your life was headed for the palace, but you woke up in a pit instead, you need to look at Joseph. Most people know Joseph because of the coat of many colors, but the coat was actually the worst thing that ever happened to him. That coat was a target. It was a physical representation of being a favorite, and in a house full of brothers who felt overlooked, that coat was an insult. Think about the tension in that house. Have you ever been the different one in your own family? The one who has the big dreams, the one who actually believes things can be different, while everyone else is content with just surviving. That was Joseph. And his brothers didn't just disagree with his dreams, they hated him for them. They didn't just want to take his coat, they wanted to take his future. They threw him into a dry cistern, a pit in the middle of nowhere, and then sat down to eat lunch while their brother screamed for mercy below them. Let that sink in. They were so cold-hearted that they could eat a meal while their own flesh and blood was facing death. This is where the story gets real for us. You might not be in a literal pit today, but maybe you're in a financial pit, or a depression pit, or a pit of loneliness that you didn't ask for. You did the right thing. You had the big dream, and now you're stuck. But watch what happens next. Joseph gets sold. He goes from being a favorite son to being a piece of property in Egypt. He ends up in the house of a man named Potiphar. Now, this is the part of the story we usually skip over, but it's the most important for your 2026 breakthrough. Joseph didn't mope. He didn't spend 3 years complaining about his brothers on social media. He started working. He realized that even in a bad situation, he served a great God. He became so good at his job that Potiphar put him in charge of everything. This is a use case for us right now. Maybe you're in a job you hate. Maybe you're overqualified and underpaid. The Joseph strategy is to be so excellent in your current pit that the people around you have no choice but to notice your light. Excellence is a spiritual weapon. But just when things were looking up, Joseph got hit again. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. He did the right thing. He ran away from temptation, and his reward was a prison cell. Have you ever felt like God was punishing you for being obedient? You stayed faithful, you kept your integrity, and you still got the short end of the stick. Joseph spent years in that prison. This is the waiting room phase. This is where most people give up. They start thinking, if God was really with me, I wouldn't be here. But the Bible says something incredible. The Lord was with Joseph in the prison. God doesn't always take you out of the storm immediately. Sometimes he just gets in the boat with you. While he was in prison, Joseph met 2 guys, a cupbearer and a baker. They both had dreams. Joseph, even though he was a prisoner himself, took the time to listen to them. He interpreted their dreams. He helped them find clarity when he didn't even have clarity for his own life. That's a massive lesson for us. If you want a breakthrough, start being the answer to someone else's prayer while you're waiting for yours. Joseph told the cupbearer, "When you get out, remember me." But the guy forgot. He stayed in that prison for 2 more years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of wondering if the dreams he had as a teenager were just hallucinations. But then Pharaoh had a dream. No one could figure it out. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembered the guy in the basement. In one single day, one moment, Joseph went from the prison to the palace. He went from wearing rags to wearing the ring of the king of Egypt. This is the one thought away principle we talked about before. Pharaoh had a problem, and Joseph had the wisdom. He didn't just interpret the dream. He gave Pharaoh a 14-year economic strategy to save the world from famine. He became the most powerful man in the world, second only to Pharaoh. Years later, a famine hit the entire region. Who showed up at the palace looking for food? The very brothers who threw him in the pit. They didn't recognize him, but he knew exactly who they were. He had the power to have them executed on the spot. He had the power to make them suffer the way they made him suffer. But Joseph had learned something in those 13 years of pain. When he finally revealed himself to them, they were terrified. They thought it was payback time. But Joseph looked at them and said the most powerful words in the entire Bible. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Look at that perspective. He didn't say, "It's okay, what you did wasn't that bad." No, he acknowledged the evil. He said, "You meant it for evil." But he also saw the higher hand. He realized that the pit, the slave traders, the false accusations, and the prison were all just transportation to get him to the throne. If he hadn't been in the pit, he wouldn't have been sold. If he hadn't been sold, he wouldn't have been in Potiphar's house. If he hadn't been in Potiphar's house, he wouldn't have been in prison. If he hadn't been in prison, he wouldn't have met the cupbearer. And if he hadn't met the cupbearer, he never would have stood before Pharaoh. Every no in Joseph's life was a setup for the ultimate yes. In 2026, you might be looking at some no's in your life. You might be looking at some betrayals that still sting. But I want you to start looking for the God intended it for good angle. Stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this preparing me for?" Joseph's life is a documentary on the sovereignty of God. It shows us that God can take the worst intentions of your enemies and turn them into the raw materials for your greatest victory. The people who tried to bury you didn't realize you were a seed. The people who tried to drown you didn't realize you could swim. Your breakthrough isn't just about you getting a palace. It's about you being in a position to save your family, your community, and your future. Don't let the pit make you bitter. Let the pit make you better. Gird up the loins of your mind and realize that the King is still on the throne, and he's using even the shadows to paint a masterpiece. Your story isn't over yet. The palace is coming. Keep your integrity, keep your excellence, and keep your eyes on the one who never left Joseph's side.